Namaskaram, Michael.
Namaskaram.
Yeah. Today we are having our second talk in a series of 8 talks. That is a follow-up on the publishing of the book Ramana Maharshi's 40 Verses on What Is, the writings and translations you did on Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu.
Right.
And in that book, you are mentioning 8 key points that are essential for all of Bhagavan's teachings. And what we are doing is we're talking about each one of those key points in a video. And in the previous video, we talked about what actually exists. It's only ourselves as we actually are.
Yeah.
And in this video, we are talking about what we actually are is just pure existence awareness, sat-cit, which is what always shines as our own being, our fundamental awareness, I am, and which is the infinite fullness of perfect happiness, ānanda.
Right.
When I was reading this sentence, I was already getting happy. It's because it's the truth, of course, what is being said there. So, well, I'm happy to listen about what you have to say about this, and perhaps as a good opening question, what does Bhagavan mean with pure existence awareness and in that we are that?
Existence, one thing Bhagavan said about existence, what exists must always exist. If something exists at one time and not at another time, it doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. So that means all things that appear and disappear, all things that come into existence and cease to exist, do not actually exist. They just, though they seem to exist, they do not actually exist. So what is the one thing that actually exists? As Bhagavan says in what I referred to last time, in the first sentence of the 7th paragraph of Nāna, Bhagavan says, Jata mai Uļḷadu Atma-vichara. That means what actually exists is only Atma-swarupa. Atma-swarupa, swarupa, the etymological meaning of swarupa is own form, but it means real nature in the sense of what something actually is. So Atma-swarupa is the real nature of ourself in the sense of what we actually are. So what we actually are alone is what actually exists. So we are pure being, pure existence. And the nature of existence, as Bhagavan says, for example, in verse 23 of Upadesha Undiyana, because of the non-existence of any awareness other than what exists, to know what exists is awareness. The term he uses there for what exists is Uļḷadu, which means what is or what exists. And he uses the word unavu for awareness. So awareness is what actually exists, because if existence were known by something other than itself, then that other thing, being other than existence, would be non-existent, which makes no sense. So the only, what actually exists, according to Bhagavan, is only consciousness. Consciousness or awareness in the sense of pure consciousness, pure awareness. Not the awareness but knows things other than itself, that is ego, is not the real awareness, because nothing other than ourself actually exists. So knowing other things, when we know other things, they seem to us to exist. We know this world, so this world seems to us to exist. But it doesn't actually exist because it comes into existence and it ceases to exist. Moreover, it comes into existence and ceases to exist only in the view of ego or mind, which itself comes into existence and ceases to exist. Every night when we fall asleep, we cease to be ego. Ego ceases to exist. And when we wake up in the morning, ego comes into existence again. So ego itself is something that appears and disappears. and everything else appears and disappears only in the view of ego. So the reality underlying ego, namely sat-cit, that alone is what is real.
Yeah.
This is what Bhagavan says in verse 24 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. He says, Jata Nāṛpadu, the insentient body does not say I. When he says it does not say I, that's a metaphorical way of saying the body is not aware of itself as I. Why is that? Because it's Jata. Jata means it's not aware. And when he talks about the body here, he's not just talking about the physical form of the body, he's talking about all the five sheaths: the physical body, the life, the mind, the intellect, and the will. So these are all Jata. They're all devoid of awareness. And then in the next sentence, he says, sat-cit Uļḷadu. Sat-cit is being awareness, the pure being, pure awareness, what we actually are. Uļḷadu means it doesn't rise. But in between these two, one thing rises, one thing I rises as the extent of a body. So since that I that rises, since it rises, it's not sat-cit. And since it is an awareness I, it is not the body. So it is neither the body nor sat-cit. But as Bhagavan says, it rises in between. That means it's linked, it's somehow merging the qualities of these two things together as if they are one. So as ego, we're aware I am. That awareness I am, or that the awareness I am is the awareness of our being. So that being awareness, ego borrows from sat-cit. But it experiences itself, as Bhagavan says, to the limit of the body. That's within the confines of this body. I am here, I'm not out here. So we limit ourselves. So though we seem to be this body is not what we actually are. That the ego is neither the body nor is it sat-cit. It's something in between. And then he goes on to clarify further, saying this is chit-jata granti. Chit-jata granti means the not between chit and jata. That is, the chit element of ego is sat-cit. The jata element is the body. These two are conflated. So they are entangled as if they are one. So ego is neither the body nor sat-cit, but it's the not formed by the entanglement of the two. Of course, sat-cit doesn't get entangled, but in the view of ego, we seem to be entangled with this body. And then he goes on to say, this is chit-jata granti, bandham, jivan. That bandham is bondage. Jiva is the soul or individual, the separate existence. Nupame, the subtle body. Ahande, ego. Ichamsaram, this samsara. And manam. That is, that I is all of these things. It goes by all these different names.
Good, thank you for explaining that, Michael. Could you please explain what Bhagavan means with when he says that what we actually are is infinite fullness of perfect happiness?
Yeah, Bhagavan gives various reasons why. I mean, obviously the main reason, this is Bhagavan's experience. When Bhagavan, that is, even to say experiences sounds inadequate, because it sounds like Bhagavan is someone who is experiencing that. Bhagavan is that sat-cit, and as sat-cit, he knows himself as infinite happiness. When people talk about happiness, people often associate happiness with pleasure or some experience. But when Bhagavan is talking about happiness, he's talking about it in a much deeper sense. One word in Sanskrit is ānanda. but another word that Bhagavan often uses when he's referring to our real nature is the word sukham. Sukham and dukkham are two contrasting words. I think the best, or one way in which we can translate, that is, sukha is happiness, dukkha is unhappiness. But I think one of the ways in which we can translate them, sukha is satisfaction, dukkha is dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is the very nature of ego, because what we actually are is infinite happiness. So when we rise as ego and thereby limit ourselves to the extent of this body, we seemingly become something finite. And as something finite, something limited, we obviously cannot experience unlimited happiness. But since unlimited happiness is our real nature, we cannot rest content until we experience infinite happiness. So as ego, we are always dissatisfied. And as ego, we seem to be lacking happiness. We are aware of a deficiency in ourselves. Because we seem to be lacking happiness, we seek that happiness outside ourselves. That is the mistake we make. But do we have, Bhagavan tells us that our real nature is infinite happiness. Do we have any reason, other than what Bhagavan told us, to conclude that infinite happiness is our real nature? Bhagavan gives some very nice arguments in the first sentence of the first paragraph of Nana. One, that is what Bhagavan first points out. We all want to be happy without misery. We all want to be satisfied without dissatisfaction. So that love for happiness is intrinsic to our nature. He also points out that above all other things, we love ourselves. So, and the third point he points out is that happiness alone is the cause of love. That is, we love whatever contributes to our happiness, or whatever we believe could contribute to our happiness. So love is always following happiness. Since we love ourselves, that is a powerful indication that happiness is our real nature. Because if we ourselves were not happiness, why would we love ourselves? But of course, we don't experience ourselves as happiness now because we've limited ourselves. But we love ourselves because deep down, that is just like happiness is our real nature, self-love is our real nature. Because happiness is our real nature, we naturally love ourselves. But as ego, we continue to experience this love for ourselves. But because we take ourselves to be a person, a body endowed with mind, with life, mind, intellect, and will, we love this person as if this person were ourselves. So the fact that we love ourselves and that happiness is the cause of love is one very good reason for concluding that happiness is our real nature. And another reason he gives there, he goes on to say, in order to experience that happiness, which is one's swabhava. Swabhava means, generally swabhava is translated as our nature. But actually, swa means own, and bhava means being or existence. So that happiness is our own being. It's what we actually are. So in order to experience that happiness, which is our own nature, which we experience daily in sleep, which is devoid of mind, that's another very powerful reason for concluding that happiness is our real nature. Because in sleep, we are not aware of anything other than ourselves. We are totally on our own in sleep. We alone exist and shine in sleep. And we are happy in that state. We are perfectly contented, perfectly satisfied. There's a very deep happiness that we experience in sleep. If happiness came from anything other than ourselves, we should be devoid of happiness in sleep. The fact that we experience perfect happiness in sleep, and which is a state in which we alone exist, that is an even more powerful reason for believing, for concluding that happiness is our real nature. So as Bhagavan says in that sentence, and he concludes that sentence, in order to experience that happiness, which is our own nature, and which we experience daily in sleep, which is devoid of mind, that manamatra nidraya, in sleep which is devoid of mind is very important there. Because sleep is a state devoid of mind, it's devoid of everything, because all other things appear only in the view of the mind. So in the absence of the mind, there's nothing other than ourselves. So in order to experience that happiness, which is our own nature, and which is experienced every day in sleep, which is devoid of mind, tanne tan aridal vendum, oneself, knowing oneself is necessary. And then in the next sentence, he says, Idaku nana ennam jnana vicharame mukhya sadhanam. For that, or for this, the jnana vichara, who am I, is the principal means. Jnana vichara means awareness investigation. So again there, Bhagavan is indicating what we actually are. Awareness investigation means investigating the I, which is awareness. In other words, investigating ourselves. That is the principal means. Because since we are self for happiness, we can experience that happiness only by being aware of ourselves as we actually are. And in order to be aware of ourselves as we actually are, we need to investigate ourselves. Since the main topic of the main work we're talking about today is Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, it's worth mentioning, actually, Uļḷadu Nāṛpadu is mainly about being an awareness. Bhagavan doesn't touch much upon the happiness aspect in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. In, I think, the second or third verse, he mentions about the world exists, no, it doesn't exist. Sorry, the world is real, no, it is not real. The world is awareness, no, it is not awareness. Sorry, I'll just get the verse again. In verse 3, Bhagavan says, Uļḷadu me poitotram. That is, these are different points of view. The world is real. It's an unreal appearance. These are two different views that people have. Uļḷadu arivam andru. The world is it's awareness. It is not. That is it. The world is knowledge. It is not. And then he says, Uļḷadu sukham andru. The world is happiness, it is not. These are different views that people have. And Bhagavan says, rather than engaging in all these different views and all these disputes over different views, the state in which we leave the world and know ourselves, thereby giving up the duality of duality and non-duality. He says one devoid of one and two. There one represents non-duality and two represents duality. We need to go beyond this duality of duality and non-duality. That's a very nice point Bhagavan says there. That state is nanatra, without I. That means without ego. Annilay, that state is agreeable to all. That is, we all like the one state that we all like is we all love is sleep. We all like to sleep. And if anyone doubts how much they like to sleep, try to go without sleep for a few days, and you'll reach a point where you want nothing more than to sleep. People who are for one reason or another are deprived of sleep for a long time, they'll do anything to sleep. For example, if someone is in extremely cold conditions, they know that if they lie down and sleep, they won't wake up again. So in order to hold on to the life in the body, they have to keep awake. But a time will come where they're ready even to give up the body just to have just to enjoy some sleep. So we all have greatest love for sleep. So that's why Bhagavan said that state that is devoid of I is agreeable to all. And because it's devoid of I, it's also devoid of all dualities, such as duality and non-duality. And it's also devoid of, it's devoid of world. We cease to know the world. So that is the state we should all be aiming for. So this, why I mention this verse, this is one verse in which he mentions happiness. He uses the word sukham here, because some people think the world is a source of happiness. Some people recognize, no, the world is not a source of happiness. That's one place where he mentions happiness. And the other place where he mentions happiness is in verse 31, where he's talking about this, the final attainment. He says, Tannayaritu Arunda Tanmayananda. Tanmayananda means the happiness that is of the nature of that. That here refers to Brahman. So that Brahmananda, which rose destroying oneself. But he uses the word, not only Ananda, he uses the word Anandar. He puts an R on the end, which makes it a personal noun. So it implies those who experience that Tanmayananda, which rises destroying oneself. Destroying oneself means destroying ego. For those people, what one thing remains to be, what one thing exists to do. There's nothing they need to do. They're beyond need for any doing. They're beyond all karmas, all doing. They do Tanne Allah, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. They do not know anything other than themselves. Who can understand their state as it is such? So these are the only two verses where Bhagavan mentions Ānanda. In verse 3, there's no implication, but there's no direct implication that happiness is our real nature. Here there is an implication that happiness is our real nature, because when we are destroyed, that is, when ego is destroyed, we then remain as that Tanmayananda. Tanmayananda, when he makes Tanmayananda into a personal noun, it implies not only those who experience that happiness, those who actually are that happiness. So it's a very subtle way Bhagavan has worded it. But this is the only verse in which Bhagavan indicates, the only verse in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu where Bhagavan indicates that happiness is our real nature. In Upadesha there are more verses. In Nana, Bhagavan is very explicit, but in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu he doesn't dwell upon this Ānanda aspect much. Mainly in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he's talking about being and about awareness.
Yes, but I think that a good understanding of what Ānanda actually is extremely important.
It is extremely important.
Yes.
And though Bhagavan doesn't explicitly talk about Ānanda in most of these verses, implicitly he does, because in his other places he says Ānanda is nothing but sat-cit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, if I look at myself walking this path, having as much as possible, thanks to your explanations, also understanding of what Ānanda is, makes me very committed, of course, to walking this path, because it's my true nature. And for me, an important word in that you are infinite fullness of perfect happiness is the word infinite.
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, fullness and perfect, but infinite. Yeah. I mean, as long as you experience yourself as this body, you are also have the idea that you're gonna die because you think you are born.
Yeah.
So because the body is immortal, there can't be infinite happiness in that way, because everything is going to end eventually. How happy you, it doesn't matter how happy you are in your life, as long as you experience yourself as a body, it's going to end. So it's not infinite, it's finite.
And even when we're experiencing happiness, it's still limited happiness. None of us we cannot, as ego, we cannot experience not only happiness, but it's infinite in time. We cannot even experience a momentary infinite happiness, because ego is what is the obstacle.
Yes.
Because ego is finite. The finite cannot experience the infinite.
Yeah. As long as there's an I experiencing happiness, it's not true happiness.
Exactly.
Yes. But I also find it compelling in trying to understand it, and for everyone who might be watching this video and is also trying to understand this. For me, it's helpful because we are so very conceptualized about what happiness is.
Yeah.
And that's actually not what happiness is.
Yes.
So a good understanding of what it truly is, and how Bhagavan explains it and how you are able to explain it. For me, it also helps to have an understanding what Jata is. I mean, in the end, Jata is not a teaching, of course, as you say yourself and mentioned in the book, but it is helpful for me to understand, to think about happiness.
Yes.
So could you perhaps elaborate a little bit more, if I'm asking you in that way, the relationship between being infinite fullness, perfect happiness, and elsewhere Bhagavan said, I guess in Uḷḷadu, in Upadesa Undiyar, you are eternal, unchanging, and self-shining. How this is also connected with Jata?
The basic Jata, the word Jata means not born. The classic expression of Jata is a verse that occurs in the Mandukya Karika of Gaudapada. That verse, Bhagavan has translated that verse in several places, because that verse is quoted in so many places. For example, in Adi Shankara quotes it in Viveka Chudamani. So since Bhagavan translated Viveka Chudamani, he translated that verse as part of Viveka Chudamani. He also translated it separately as a Tamil verse, which is included both in Guru Vachaka Kavai and in Upadesha Tanipakal. The meaning of that verse, it begins na nirodo. There's no stopping or no cessation. Why is there no cessation? That's answered in the next thing. Na cha utpatti. Because there's also no coming into being. If something comes into being, then it will cease to exist. But if there's nothing has ever come into being, there's nothing that will ever cease to exist. And then it goes on to say there's no,
which is another way of saying infinite.
Yeah. Let's see if I'm just trying to, yes. How Bhagavan translates it in his prose translation of Viveka Chudamani, he changes those first two sentences around. He begins utpatti ille. There's no utpatti, no arising, no coming into being. Nasamile, there's no destruction. Bandhanile, there's no one who is bound. Sadhakanile, there's no sadhaka, there's no one seeking a means to get out of bondage. Because there's no one bound, there's no one to seek to get out of the bondage. Mumukshuile, there's no one who desires liberation. muktanile, there's no one who is liberated. Because there can't be liberation if there's no bondage. You have to be bound in order to be liberated. So according to Bhagavan, the ultimate state is beyond bondage and liberation. As he says in verse 29 of Upadesha Undiyya, Bandha vidatra parasukum utra indinile nitralundi para, irepani nitralamundi para. That means this state of supreme bliss, which is devoid of bondage and liberation, is beyond both bondage and liberation. That is being in that state of supreme bliss, which is beyond bondage and liberation. That is irepaninitral. Irepaninitral is a term used in Shaiva Siddhanta, which means being in the service of God. That's one way we can interpret it. Another way we can interpret it, being as enjoined by God. Because pani can be, pani means both service as a noun, or it can be a verb meaning to enjoin, to instruct. So what God has asked us to do is just to be in this state of supreme bliss, which is beyond bondage and liberation. And likewise in Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu, he says, it's a very nice verse. Well, all the verses of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu are very nice, but here what Bhagavan says is verse 39, Bhattan. Bhattan is a Tamil way of saying, a Tamil form of the Sanskrit. Well, it's a personal noun formed from bandha, so one who is bound. So Bhattan, I am bound, enamate, only so long as we say or we are aware I am someone who is bound. Thoughts of bandha mukti chintanegal, thought there will be thoughts of bondage and liberation. Button are Andrew Tanne Parkungal. When one sees when one looks at oneself as who is the one who is bound, Siddhamai Nityam Muktan Tan, when one thereby abides as eternally liberated, when oneself, the one who is eternally liberated, remains as accomplished, that is, when we alone remained as what is accomplished, since the thought of bondage does not remain, will the thought of liberation be there? So liberation has a meaning only so long as we think we are bound, but our real nature is beyond bondage and liberation. So that's why in this verse of the Bhagavan is translating from Vibhakti, which Shankara quoted from Gaudapada's Mandukya Karika. It concludes, Iduve Paramatam. This is the ultimate truth. So that is, read it again. There's no coming into being. There's no destruction. There's no one who is in bondage. There's no one who is seeking a means to get out of bondage. There's no one seeking liberation. There's no one who is liberated. This is the ultimate truth. So as Bhagavan made clear, this is a Jata. Oh, and by the way, people generally refer to this as a verse of Gaudapada, but it's quite possible that Gaudapada was quoting this from earlier sources, because it occurs in at least 2 Upanishads. The dates of some of the Upanishads are very old. It is believed that some of the Upanishads are less old. So it is possible those Upanishads could have come after Gaudapada, but it's quite probable that they were there many hundreds of years before Gaudapada. So it could be that this is a verse that Gaudapada was quoting. But anyway, it's a very well-known verse I mean, well, Gaudapada's either composed it or quoted it. Shankara has quoted it. Bhagavan has translated it. So it's a verse with, but has got I mean, this is the contention of these great souls who have attained this state. So the ultimate truth is a jata. Nothing has ever come into existence. Nothing will ever cease to exist. As Bhagavan pointed out, this is not a teaching, because there's in the state of a jata, there's no one, because there's no one bound, there's no one in need of any teaching. And there's also no separate person to teach anything. So a jata is beyond all teaching. But it's an important thing that we are told this is the ultimate state, because when we understand this, we understand how unreal this world is. So it is important to understand that. And because our real nature is never bound, it's eternally liberated, as Bhagavan says in that verse 39 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. All we need to do is to know ourselves as we actually are, to know that we were never in bondage, we never had any problem. But until we know what we actually are, we seem to be ego and we seem to have problems. So, and we seem to be finite, so we can't experience that infinite happiness. So all these fundamental principles of Bhagavan's teachings and of Advaita more generally, they're all intimately related, intimately connected. So if we understand all these, as you say, it's a great motivation for putting this into practice.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, and one more thing I'll say about that. That is another important thing to understand about happiness. Many people fail to recognize that sleep is a state of happiness. Many people say, oh, but in sleep I wasn't aware of anything. How can you say I was happy? Though we do generally say, oh, I had a nice peaceful night's sleep last night, I slept happily. But when you actually tell people, yes, so you're happy in sleep, they say, no, I wasn't aware of anything. How can you say I'm happy? Because we take happiness as something to be added to us. Because we are aware of the lack of happiness in us, that as jiva, as ego, we are lacking happiness. So happiness is something that we need to acquire. But if happiness is our real nature, it's not something we need to acquire. So we don't acquire anything when we go to sleep. We're not experiencing anything. We don't experience anything in sleep that we don't experience in waking. So because we fail to recognize that happiness is our real nature now, we fail to recognize the happiness that we experienced in sleep. To put it in, there are certain very useful words in Tamil and in Sanskrit which are lacking in English, but there's one very nice Sanskrit word that Bhagavan often used, which is disesha. Disesha means what is special, what is distinct, what is, if something is disesha, you can distinguish it from other things. But our real nature is nirvisesha. There's nothing special about it, because it's the basic, it's the base of everything. So the happiness that is our real nature is a nirvisesha happiness. It's not something that we can say, oh, I had fun, it was great, I really enjoyed myself. It's not like that. It is something that is so natural, so fundamental. And that is our real nature, because when everything is removed in sleep, can anyone say they're dissatisfied or discontented in sleep? No. All this dissatisfaction, discontent, desire, all these things arise only with ego. In the absence of ego, there's no dissatisfaction. So sleep is a state of perfect satisfaction because of the total absence of dissatisfaction, the total absence of the I that is dissatisfied, namely ego. So it's a very deep and profound happiness, but people overlook that happiness. They fail to recognize that happiness. I mean, the more our mind is outward going, the more difficult it will be for us, or the less we will be able to recognize the happiness that is in sleep. But if in the waking state, waking and dream states, we patiently and persistently practice what Bhagavan has taught us, which is trying to be self-attentive more and more, we will begin to recognize more and more clearly, but actually sleep is a state of perfect happiness. Why I say this is many people say, oh, if liberation is just like sleep, then I don't want liberation because I'm not satisfied with sleep. I want something more than that. Because we're still looking for something to be added to us. We think happiness lies in acquiring this. If I have more money, if my children are better behaved, if I have a better job, if my circumstances were more favorable, if this or that, we think happiness is something to be added to us. But actually, happiness is that state in which everything is removed. What remains is happiness. Because happiness is it's our svabhava, it's our very being.
Yes, beautiful. I was just thinking because the state of, let's call it the state of Ajara, at least for now. I mean, it's a state of no creation. So you could think about it as there's nothing.
Yeah, another thing Bhagavan might say, I'll just get it. Well, people think nothing. It's not nothing. It's everything in that state.
No, because even though there's nothing like objects, you are still there.
You are still there. And we are everything. There's nothing other than ourselves. Everything else is just an appearance.
Yeah, but it shows if you think like that. And I think it's good if you, in your Viveka, ask yourself those kind of questions. That you're very attached, as you already said, like happiness is, we see that as getting something, but there's not anything to get in a state of nothingness, because it's a non-dual state in that way. There is nothing other than yourself, and that is the ultimate infinite happiness.
Yes.
And it's infinite because you're not born, and so it's a deathless state, you could say. And a word that I can resonate on is like it's also a fearless state because there's not the worry or the fear of samsara anymore.
In the Upanishads, it is said somewhere, only the state in which there's no other thing is a state devoid of fear. So long as there's anything other than ourselves, fear is inevitable.
Yes. And for me, it's very, very helpful, just like we are talking about it right now. And I didn't prepare this question. It just arose that I thought, that awareness of what it means, like the infinite fullness of perfect happiness, that is what you truly are. And I think you can, instead of happiness, you could also say peace, because that's a word that
happiness, peace, satisfaction, they all ultimately are pointing to the same thing.
Yes, or love, that's also something that you sometimes use. So I think a good understanding.
One word that Murugan often uses in Guruvachaka Kavaya and elsewhere is upashantam. Upashantam, that is the word shanti, it is generally translated as peace, but it means peace in the sense of, it also means cessation. Like when a storm is pacified, it subsides, it comes to an end. So peace lies in that state where everything comes to an end. And that is what is indicated by that word upashantam.
Beautiful. It seems that, of course, from the perspective of ego, it seems quite paradoxical that it has to die to
be
to
happy.
say it in that way, to be born again in the eternity that it is.
Exactly.
Yeah, that seems quite paradoxical, of course. And you often talk about one of the big obstacles, of course, is the lack of willingness in the end, because we're still attached to all the objects in this world.
Yes. But one thing, since you raised this word paradoxical, many things seem to us to be paradoxical, but paradox is all in the mind.
Yeah.
When we go beyond the mind, then that is, Bhagavan, people say, oh, this, when Bhagavan says this is very paradoxical. It seems paradoxical from our perspective because of the things that we take to, because of how we view things. But actually, Bhagavan's teachings are the resolution to all paradoxes.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand it. And confusion, of course. I understand.
Can I just say one more thing? Because about a Jata, the connection between a Jata and happiness, there's another important clue Bhagavan gives us in the 14th paragraph of Nana. Towards the end, he says, Jagam embadu nineve. That means what is called the world is only thought. Jagam Mariam Podu, Adavdu Ninevatra Podu, Manam Ānanda te Atma-vichara. That means when the world disappears, that is, when thought ceases, the mind experiences ānanda, happiness. Jagam Tondram Podu, when the world appears, adu dukkate anubhava-kindradu. It experiences dukkam, it experiences unhappiness or dissatisfaction. So what Bhagavan implies here is that the world, the very appearance of the world is dukkam, is unhappiness. And the disappearance of the world is ānanda. So the state in which the world has never appeared, and the mind that sees the world has never appeared, that is the state of a Jata, that is the state of supreme and eternal happiness. The appearance of dukkam, the appearance of unhappiness, dissatisfaction, is only because of our rising as ego and consequently seeing this world of multiplicity. So a Jata is very intimately and directly connected with happiness, as you say.
Yes. Yeah. And the gate to that is
We ourselves are the gate.
Being aware of the fundamental awareness I am. That is experienced in every moment. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Right.
Is there anything else you want to say? Sean is also present and he wants to say something. Sean?
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I recently read in Talk 64, and this reminded me what you guys were saying. News of someone's death was brought to Sri Bhagavan. He said, good, the dead are indeed happy. They have got rid of the troublesome overgrowth of the body. The dead man does not grieve. The survivors grieve for the man who is dead. Do men fear sleep? On the contrary, sleep is courted, and on waking up, every man says that he slept happily. One prepares the bed for sound sleep. Sleep is temporary death. Death is longer sleep. If the man dies while yet alive, he does not grieve over others' death. One's existence is evident with or without the body, as in waking, dream, and sleep. Then why should one desire continuance of the bodily shackles? Let the man find out his undying self and die and be immortal and happy.
Yeah, I really like that passage. But there's one thing there. Can you go back and begin reading it again? Because there's one thing there that I wanted to point out.
News of someone's death was brought to Sri Bhagavan. He said, good, the dead are indeed happy. They have got rid of the troublesome overgrowth of the body. The dead man does not grieve. The survivors grieve for the man who is dead. Do men fear sleep?
That's what the survivors grieve for the man who is dead. Bhagavan also pointed out, I don't know whether he pointed out on this particular occasion, but Bhagavan often used to point out, when we grieve for the departed, we are not actually grieving for the departed. We are grieving for ourselves. That is, they are happy. They're free of this bondage of body. We feel sorry because we are attached to them. And so when they go, we feel we have lost something. We have lost our loved ones. So, but grieving is not, we are not, though we think we are grieving for the departed, we are grieving for our loss of the departed, not for them. So our grief is only for ourselves. That why we are attached to, and another thing Bhagavan often pointed out, why we are attached to other people and are grief-stricken when they pass away, we are attached to them as a body because they don't cease to exist. Just because the body ceases to exist, they may cease to exist as the person that they seem to be, but as Krishna says so beautifully in the 2nd chapter of Gita, none of us die. That is, there is no such thing as death for ourselves. Death is only for the body. And of course, ultimately for ego. But so why we are so attached to them as a body? Because we're attached to ourselves as a body. So ultimately all grieving is caused only by this dehatma-bhava, this dehabhimana, this attachment, identification of ourself as I am this body. But that is one of the nicer passages of talks. I particularly like that where Bhagavan said, good, the dead are happy. I often think of that. But it's when I hear news of someone passing away, sometimes I refer to that. If the person who is bereaved is someone close to Bhagavan's teachings, who's really ready to accept Bhagavan's teaching, then I often point out that because it's such a nice passage. That is just one occasion, but this is very typical. Bhagavan often used to say like this.
Yes, actually, yesterday, this I'm going to cut out, but yesterday evening I read a little passage, I don't know where it is, in Day by Day, about a visitor who was grieving about someone who died, I don't know, his son or whatever. Yeah, and it was such a beautiful passage to just read. Yeah.
No need to cut it out because
okay.
Well, another thing that strikes me there is he's not saying like that jiva is going to be reborn. He doesn't even get into that. He's just like, well, they're dead. Good for them. We should be happy. They're happy.
That person is finished. The I that is aware of itself as I am this person, that I goes on. That I is what needs to die. That's what he points out at the end. We need to die even while living. Because that is, most people who have an idea of post-mortem existence have an idea, we go to, like, not only Christian, even in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, most people have some idea about going to some heaven or to hell, depending on how we behave ourselves here. But we still think that we retain this same identity. So when I go to heaven, I will see my departed parents, I will meet my departed loved ones, because we still think that we will retain the same identity and they retain the same identity. But death is actually the end of that identity. That is, once Michael dies, Michael is finished. There's no such thing as the I that is now aware of itself as I am Michael. That I will continue unless it knows what itself as it actually is. But this identity, Michael, is completely finished.
Well, that's also something of the mind-blowing aspects of the truth of what you really are, because we are pure existence awareness,
Yes.
and we are infinite.
Yeah.
So thanks to how you explained it, that means we have to be formless. And in the meantime, we are so attached to this form, this
Yes.
body, but our true nature is formless, even
Yes.
though we experience ourselves as a form.
But
And
so
we see
long as
others.
we're attached to this form, when we give up this form, we'll, as Bhagavan says, Uļḷadu Nāṛpadu, leaving form it grasp form, in verse 25 of Uļḷadu Nāṛpadu.
Yes.
So long as the grasping ego is still there, we will continue identifying with one form or another. So it's the identity. If this I doesn't die, when Michael dies, the identity I am Michael is finished. But then it'll switch over to I am someone else, whoever else.
Yes.
But the identification is so strong, but this is my identity. I am Michael. So when Michael dies and goes to heaven or hell or wherever, I'll still be Michael. That's the idea, but generally people have about post-mortem existence.
One of my favorite things that you say is, go ahead and put me in hell. If that's your will, it is happiness for me, that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Surrender to whatever his will is for you.
Yeah. That is whatever we are given to experience, we're given by him it's given to us by him for our own good. So if we find ourselves in hell, that's because hell is for our own good. So it's his sweet will.
Thank you very much, Michael. Shall we go on to the questions that are
certainly
asked by an announcement video on the Q&A channel?
Yeah.
There are several questions asked. I know Sean also has some questions. Just for me, Sean, do you want to ask right now, or do you say go ahead with some questions and then I can ask my question? What do you want?
I'll go ahead and ask the first question if that's okay.
Yeah.
I thought this was interesting. I picked up Ray Kurzweil's new book, The Singularity is Nearer When We Merge with AI. And I just thought it was striking because he's one of the leaders in the field. He's worked on it longer than anyone alive for 61 years. And chapter 3 is titled, Who Am I? So I think it's interesting that he's sort of a leader in this field, but it seems to me that his view largely aligns with yours. He says, I'll quote pieces here. He says, we say confidently that another human is conscious, but even that is technically just an assumption. We can't detect consciousness or the lack thereof directly. And then he says, each of us, I can only assume, has subjective experience. But he also acknowledges, just like you do, that anyone who doesn't acknowledge a child's suffering anyone who doesn't acknowledge a child's consciousness and capacity for suffering is considered gravely immoral. So he has both aspects. And he says, although we'll never be able to prove this scientifically, there will be a powerful ethical imperative to act as though it is true. So this reminded me specifically of Dr. Bernardo Kastrup's conversation with you. So he's acknowledging both sides, just like you do. He's simultaneously saying it can't be proven that other people are conscious. We can't know that with certainty, but it doesn't mean you can't act immorally. It seems to me that's perfectly aligned with what you're saying.
Yeah. Because so long as we look outwards, we see the existence of other people. And because we as ego take ourselves to be a person, it seems to us that every other person is an ego. But there's an ego. An ego means an experiencer in each and every other person. So, and the other people are as real as the person we take ourselves to be. as real or as unreal, whichever way. I mean, this person I take myself to be is no more real than any other person. So when we're, even if all this is a dream, as Bhagavan says it is, in a dream, we need to act in the dream as if the dream is real, because our very acting is itself a part of the dream. So of course we need to be compassionate, because it seems to us, not only people, animals also, you can clearly see what appears to be suffering in animals. So why should, when we believe in our own suffering, why shouldn't we believe in the suffering of others? That is, so long as we're looking outwards. So then why did Bhagavan teach this Eka-jiva Vada, that there's actually only one jiva? That is not to be applied when we're looking outwards, because when we're looking outwards, we're in the world of appearances. And in the world of appearances, there are multiple jivas. But those multiple jivas appear in whose view? In the view of the one jiva who says there are in the view of the one jiva. So how to apply this Eka-jiva Vada? It's not just to say, oh, I'm the only sentient being here, everyone else is my mental fabrication, because that's a misunderstanding, or a misapplication of the understanding. So, because it's a misapplication, in that sense, it's a misunderstanding. The correct application of Eka-jiva Vada is, oh, if I am the only jiva, then who am I? It's to turn our attention back, but the sole aim of Bhagavan's teachings is constantly to turn our attention back to ourselves. So that is why he teaches Eka-jiva Vada. I mean, he's teaching it because if all this is a dream, which it is, then there can only be one dreamer of a dream. And who is that one dreamer? It's obviously the one who's experiencing all this. That is, the dreamer is the one who sees the dream. So the one who sees the dream, whoever that may be, needs to turn their attention back within to see, who am I? That is the correct application. That's where there was a breakdown in communication between me and Bernardo, because I probably wasn't expressing myself very well, but he would, whether it was because of my failure to communicate it properly or whether it was because of his failure to grasp it properly, I don't know. But he was seeing that I am, as if I am implying that other people have no interior life. So long as our interior life seems to be real, our interior life means not the life of our being, but the life of interior in this context means inside the mind. We have so many thoughts, feelings, and things, which according to Bhagavan actually are exterior, but in normal parlance, we refer to it as interior. If I have an interior life, then why shouldn't other people have an interior life? So, because that's what it seems to be. It seems to me, who have an interior life, but every other person seems to be having an interior life. How do I infer that? From their behavior. Doesn't mean it's not an appearance. It is an appearance, but so long as we are in this appearance, we have to behave within this appearance in an appropriate manner, in accordance with the seeming reality of this world. That is why Advaita distinguishes Paramartika Satya, the ultimate truth, from what is sometimes called Vivaharika Satya, the transactional truth, and is sometimes called Pratibhasika Satya, which means seeming truth. Some people think that the Pratibhasika Satya, the seeming truth, and the Vivaharika Satya are two different truths, but in the deeper form of Advaita, as taught by Bhagavan, Vivaharika Satya is itself Pratibhasika Satya. That is, Vivaharika Satya is only a seeming reality, it's not actual reality. But so long as we're engaged in vivahara, in interaction with the world, we have to behave accordingly. Because our very actions of themselves are part of this vivahara.
That reminds me of another question I had for you before, really quick, is I mentioned Bhagavan in Talk 17. He said, for a realized man, the one who remains ever in the self, the loss of one or several or all lives, either in this world or in all the three worlds, makes no difference. Even if he happens to destroy them all, no sin can touch such a pure soul. Maharshi quoted the Gita, chapter 18, verse 17, he who is free from the notion of ego, whose intellect is unattached, though he annihilates all the worlds, he slayeth not, nor is he bound by the results of his actions. And that reminded me of an AI safety statement that was signed by numerous experts. It said, mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. And it was signed by a number of people. So how do you respond to that?
Well, I think they're two quite different things, because what is said in Gita, which is what Bhagavan was explaining there, from the Paramartika perspective, the annihilation of all jivas is not real. It doesn't actually happen at all in the Paramartika, because the Paramartika is a Jata. There's no destruction, no coming into being. As far as the scientists or whoever has signed that thing, maybe there are dangers in AI, but that's all. Whatever dangers may be there are all part of the Vivaharika Satya. They don't touch the Paramartika Satya. And regarding what Bhagavan is recorded to have said in passage 17, section 17 of talks, many things that Bhagavan says are not representative of his true teachings, because for the one who knows himself, there is no world. So there's no possibility of them annihilating all life forms in the world, because there are no life forms or worlds in which they annihilate them. So we need to understand different. I mean, I'm not saying Bhagavan didn't say that. Bhagavan would have said that, but that is not. There are different levels of teachings. So why Krishna said that in the Gita? Because he's addressing Arjuna, who is facing in battle, facing his beloved grandfather, his teacher, and so many other beloved people. He thinks, how can I fight? If I engage in this war, I'm going to kill those whom I love so much, whom I respect so highly. Those who have nurtured me as a child, who've taught me all that I know. How can I kill all these? So Krishna says, those who are killed are already killed by me. Even if you kill it, because it's already ordained what is going to happen. It's not going to touch you. You're a kshatriya. You're a warrior. As a warrior, you have a duty to stand up for what is right. You have to stand up for dharma. All those other people, however beloved they may be, they're on the wrong side. They're supporting adharma. They're supporting unrighteousness. So you do, but Krishna's very nicely in that second chapter, he's talking from a very absolute point of view. Like in the previous, that I think you said that is chapter 2, verse 17. But the very previous verse, chapter 2, verse 16, Krishna actually talks a jata. Though it's not usually explained in that way, but it is a jata, because what he says in verse 16 is, there is no existence of the non-existence. There is no non-existence of the existence. this is a verse that Bhagavan translated, and Bhagavan explained it, that which actually exists can never cease to exist. So whatever exists at one time and not at another time doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. That is a jata, because it's saying basically only one thing exists and nothing else exists at all. Even if it seems to exist, it doesn't actually exist.
We have a very particular case that's happening right now, which is Yaroslav has been sent to the front lines in the war against Russia. He's in Ukraine. Yeah. And he says he thinks it might be the case that he's called to walk the path of Arjuna, referencing the Gita. So I wonder if you have any sort of message for Yaroslav or anyone who might be in similar circumstances, or loved ones who might be, or.
That is, yeah, it's, I mean, what can we say in such circumstances? This is one of the inherent flaws of, this is samsara, this is embodied existence. When we are embodied, we are all struggling for survival. And people have so many different desires, and we tend to form ourselves into communities. We have families. We have people always identify with certain groups. We identify ourselves with a certain religion, a certain political affiliation, a certain nationality. All these things are there, and often there is conflict, and conflict throughout history. Anywhere in the world, there have been wars going on constantly because of conflict. Ultimately, all this conflict arises out of desire, out of greed, ultimately, it's out of a struggle for survival. But when we're put in a situation where our country, our loved ones, all those we hold dear are under attack, and there are two options: either you fight or you surrender. Neither neither are really acceptable. It's not acceptable to fight, but it's also not acceptable to surrender, because if you surrender, so many people are going to suffer as a result of that. If you fight, people suffer. So often we're in a position. This is depicted in the two ityasas, the great epics of Hinduism, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Both are talking about this problem of dharma. In the case of Ramayana, it's a little simpler. I mean, even there, it's very complex, but it's even more complex in Mahabharata, where people are duty bound to support the unrighteous, like Bhishma, because he had made a vow. That vow bound him in such a way that he ended up fighting on the wrong side, fighting against his beloved grandsons. Well, great, in Western terms, we'd say great nephews, but in India, they refer to as grandsons. So life is extremely complicated. We all are put in situations sooner or later where it's often not clear what is the right thing to do. And things that we consider wrong under one set of circumstances is considered justified in another set of circumstances. For example, in normal society, killing someone is unrighteous. But in a war situation, you're killing in order to save lives. So where is the right and where is the wrong? It's so difficult. So ultimately, what is the solution to all these problems? all these problems are inevitable to a greater or lesser extent, so long as we rise as ego and identify ourselves as a body.
Yeah, that's
so
like
what Bhagavan has
just war
taught
theory.
us, the final solution, I think the term final solution was a term coined by Hitler, but what he called the final solution wasn't a final solution at all. It just suited his own politics. But what Bhagavan has given us, this is the real final solution. Kill ourselves, kill this ego, and then be as we actually are.
Yeah, you're reminding me, St. Thomas Aquinas had a theory of the principle of double effect, which is like your intention isn't to kill that being, but your intention is to stop them from killing another being. And if that requires lethal force, that's not your intention. That's just what is required to stop them from killing someone else.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, that's one of the lessons that is taught in the Mahabharata. But Mahabharata is it's an extremely and I read something very nice recently, some comment that someone made about the Mahabharata. They said it's the greatest of all the Dharma Sastras, greatest of all the scriptures on Dharma. But Mahabharata doesn't give answers. Mahabharata asks lots of questions, but doesn't provide the answers. Because ultimately in life, we each have to decide for ourselves. Now, Yaroslav, for example, it's a Dharma Sangadam. It's a moral dilemma he's in. But somehow he has to decide one thing or another. And who is to judge what he decides is right or wrong? Only God can know that. So if Mahabharata gave simple answers, it would be misleading us. What Mahabharata teaches us is the complexity of embodied existence. There are no simple right and wrongs.
Another thing I'd like to bring up
and
really
actions
quick.
have consequences. Even actions taken with good intention, like Bhishma made his vow with good intention, but it ended up having such terrible consequences, which were out of his control once he had made that vow.
Another thing I'd like to bring up last before Sandra takes over again is Robert Lawrence Kuhn of Closer to Truth emailed both of us, and he said that his comprehensive review of theories of consciousness, a landscape of consciousness toward a taxonomy of explanations and implications, was just published in the journal Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, and it's now online. And I wanted to reference that because in it he cites you, and you gave a really nice writing there about Bhagavan and Bhagavan's view on consciousness. And I think you have a fuller treatment actually that you were going to put on your blog.
Yeah, I will do what I wrote to him at that time when he was. I will post that on my blog. I mean, he just quoted extracts from what I had written, so I will post it on my blog. Maybe not immediately, but because I'm in the midst of doing other things at the moment. But I will do so.
Well, he asked if I might promote it a bit, and sure, I'm grateful, happy to do so. And then anyone who's interested can look that up and see what you wrote. And yeah, it's a really great article.
Yeah. Just in the last few days, some questions have been asked on my channel, which I thought would be relevant to this discussion because they're all about consciousness or awareness.
Yes.
So I'll just read them one by one and briefly answer them.
Yes.
The first one is someone asked, if pure awareness becomes aware of something like a breeze, is that no longer pure awareness as it now has an object? This is a misunderstanding of what pure awareness is, because pure awareness is immutable. Immutable means it cannot undergo change. For pure awareness is pure being, so it has no becoming. So pure awareness cannot ever become aware of something. What is aware of anything is ego. So what is aware of a breeze or anything else is ego. So long as we are continue to be aware either of phenomena or of the absence of phenomena, we who are aware of that are ego. The awareness that we actually are, the pure awareness, as Bhagavan says, it is devoid not only of knowledge of anything else, it's also devoid of ignorance of anything else. Bhagavan says this in, for example, in verse 27 of Upadesha Undiyar, he says, the awareness that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is awareness. This is what is real. There's nothing for knowing. That is, because what actually exists is only pure awareness. Pure awareness, as pure awareness, can never know anything other than itself, because it knows what alone actually exists, namely itself. So for pure awareness, there's nothing. Because there's nothing to know, there's also nothing to not know. So it is beyond both knowledge and ignorance of anything other thing. So what knows other things, and as Bhagavan said, Bhagavan explains it very beautifully in verses 10, 11, and 12 and 13 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. I'll just very briefly go through these verses because these are important verses. Well, just before verse 10, in verse 9, Bhagavan says, the dyads and triads exist always holding one thing. What he means by dyads is pairs of opposites, things like knowledge and ignorance, existence and non-existence, life and death, awareness and non-awareness, happiness and misery, good and bad, liberation and bondage. All these pairs of opposites, that's the dyads, and the triads means the triputi, the three factors of objective knowledge. That is the knower, the knowing, and the known. In other words, the knower is ego. The whatever is known is the known. But in order to know something, there has to be a means of knowing it. So we know some things by seeing. So seeing is a means of knowing. Hearing is a means of knowing. There are some things that we don't know through our five senses, but we know by other means. We know by testimony because we've heard it from a reliable source, or we know by inference, by logical deduction. So there are various means of knowing. So all knowing of anything other than ourselves involves these three: the knower, the means of knowing, and the thing that is known. So these are what Bhagavan refers to as the dyads and triads. In Tamil, irratigal, mupadigal. He said these always exist holding one thing. When he says holding, what he means by holding is depending on. So what is the one thing they depend on? If we consider the triads, there cannot be anything known without a means of knowing it. And there cannot be anything known or any means of knowing it without a knower. So out of these three, which is fundamental? It's obviously the knower, because without the knower, there would neither be anything known or any means of knowing it. So ego is what is fundamental in the triad. Likewise, the dyads, all these pairs of opposites, existence, non-existence, life, death, awareness, non-awareness, knowledge, ignorance, these dyads appear in whose view? Only in the view of ourself as ego. In sleep, we go beyond all these dyads and triads. We alone exist in sleep. But when we rise as ego in waking and dream, all these dyads and triads come into existence. So the one thing he refers to here is ego. And then he says, if one sees within the mind what that one thing is, they slip off. They slip off means the dyads and triads slip off. In other words, they cease to exist. So why do dyads and triads cease to exist? If we see within the mind what that one thing is, what in other words, what ego is. This is where we come to the very core of Bhagavan's teachings. We seem to be ego so long as we're looking outside, so long as we're looking at it, and so long as we're attending to anything other than ourselves, we seem to be ego. But if we turn our attention back on ourselves, ego will thereby subside and dissolve back into its source. And without ego, no dyads and triads can exist. So by turning our attention back within to see who am I who know all these dyads and triads, we as ego subside, and therefore the dyads and triads subside along with us. And then he says, only those who have seen had seen the reality. That means only those who have seen the reality of this seer had seen what is ultimately real. The reality of the seer is ourself, our own being. And then he said they will not be confused. So why I quoted this verse is because he talks about dyads here. And he points out the dyads depend upon ego. So in the next verse, well, the next 4 verses, he's talking about this dyad of knowledge and ignorance. So in verse 10, he says, leaving ignorance, knowledge does not exist. Leaving knowledge, that ignorance does not exist. The word he uses here for leaving is vittu. Vittu, it's an adverbial participle, but it's used here in the sense of without. So the implication is, without ignorance, knowledge does not exist. Without knowledge, ignorance does not exist. That is, this is here Bhagavan is talking about the pair of opposites, knowledge and ignorance. Here the knowledge and ignorance is knowledge and ignorance about other things. So when we come, whatever we know other than ourselves, we come to know it at some point. We haven't always known. Whatever we know now, we didn't always know this. When we were born, we didn't know it. We have come to know so many things during the course of our life. So what we know now is based upon a prior ignorance. And all that we know now, we're going to cease to know when this body dies. We don't even have to wait till the body dies. When we fall asleep, we cease to know all these things. So the knowledge and whatever knowledge we have about anything other than ourselves is based upon a prior ignorance of that thing. And without knowledge of something other than ourselves, ignorance of it doesn't exist. Because, why? This is a very subtle point. Because according to Bhagavan, nothing exists independent of our knowledge of it. That is why we say this world exists. The world doesn't actually exist. It seems to exist because we know it, because we perceive it, because we cognize it. So without knowledge of this world, the world wouldn't exist. And if the world didn't exist, we couldn't say we were ignorant of it. So if we come to know something, at that moment we come to know it, the knowledge of that thing comes into existence. But not only does the knowledge of that thing come into existence, the ignorance of it also comes into existence. Because only when we know it, we know, oh, previously I didn't know this. So knowledge and ignorance, this pair of opposites, are mutually dependent. And then he goes on to say, only the knowledge, here he uses the Tamil word he uses for knowledge is arivu. Arivu means both knowledge and awareness. But just for, so in the previous, so just for to make it clear how it's expressed in Tamil, I'll refer to it as knowledge. But in many cases, what he refers to here as knowledge means awareness. So in the next sentence, he says, only the knowledge but knows oneself, who is the first, as to whom are that knowledge and ignorance, is knowledge. What this implies is only the awareness but is aware of the reality of ourselves, of what we actually are. And he said that knows oneself, who is the first. Who is the first implies who is the first to arise. So here oneself is referring to ego. But when he said the knowledge but knows oneself, it means the knowledge but knows the reality of ego, who is the first to arise, and how to know that by investigating to whom are that knowledge and ignorance. To whom are that knowledge and ignorance? Only for ego. So if we know the reality of ourself, who have this knowledge and ignorance, that knowledge of ourself, that alone is the real knowledge. That is the real awareness. And in verse 11, he says, not knowing oneself who knows, knowing other things is ignorance. Besides, is it knowledge? That is what he implies here is knowing anything other than ourself is not knowledge, it is only ignorance. Because nothing other than ourself actually exists. So knowing other things, we think we have knowledge when we know anything other than ourselves, but this knowledge is actually ignorance, because those other things that we think we know don't actually exist. So our knowledge of them is actually ignorance. And then again, he says, when one knows oneself, the support for knowledge and the other, knowledge and ignorance will cease. That is, when we know the reality of ego, the reality of ourself as ego, ego is the support for knowledge and the other. Knowledge and the other means knowledge and ignorance. Knowledge and ignorance will cease. Because when we know the reality of ourself, ego will cease to exist, and therefore knowledge and ignorance will cease to exist. This is the same idea that he expressed in verse 9 when he said, if one investigates within the mind, who is that one? Knowledge, that is, the dyads and triads will drop off because they depend upon ego. So when we investigate ourselves and know ourselves as we actually are, ego will cease to exist, and knowledge and the dyads and triads will cease to exist. One of those dyads is knowledge and ignorance. And then in verse 12, he says the same, but earlier I'd referred to verse 27 of Upadesha. He says the same in verse 12 of Uḻḷadu Nāṛpadu. What is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is actually knowledge. In other words, the real awareness is not awareness of anything other than ourselves. It is that awareness that is devoid of both knowledge of anything other than ourselves and ignorance of anything other than ourselves, because there's nothing other than ourselves either for us to know or to not know. And then he goes on to say, that which knows is not real knowledge. That which knows here means that which knows things other than itself. That is ego. That is not real knowledge, means it's not real awareness. It's only it's chidabhasa. It is a semblance of awareness, but not the real awareness. And then he goes on to say, since one shines without another, here one means what we actually are. Since as we actually are, we shine without anything other, either for knowing or for causing to know. Oneself is knowledge, oneself is pure awareness, is the implication. One is not a void. And then he goes on to say, in verse 13, Jnanamam tane me, oneself who is jnana alone is real. Jnana here means awareness in the sense of pure awareness. Jnana doesn't always mean pure awareness. We have to understand from a context. But in this context, when he says oneself who is jnana, it means oneself who is pure awareness alone is real. Nānavam jnanam ajnanamam. Jnana that is manifold is ajnana, ignorance. So awareness that is manifold, in other words, awareness that knows many things, or there's another way of understanding this. That is, he says in the first sentence, oneself alone is real. So actually, there's only one thing that actually exists. In an earlier version of this verse, he had written Nana Vaikan Kindranyana. That means the awareness that sees as many. That is the awareness that knows that one thing as all these many things. That is ignorance. So that's what he implies when he says Nana Vamyanam. The awareness that is manifold, that is ego. Ego is because ego sees the one thing that actually exists as all this manyness. That is ignorance. But even that ignorance which is unreal does not exist except as oneself, who is awareness. That is, ego, the ignorance is ego. This ego is unreal, but it seems to exist only because it is support. Its underlying support is ourself, who are pure awareness. And then he gives an analogy. All the many ornaments are unreal. Do they exist except as gold, which is real? That is, gold is the substance. The ornaments have no independent existence. If you take away the gold, you're not left with a ring or a bangle or a necklace or a whatever. All these ornaments, they are nothing but gold. They are particular forms taken by gold. But if you melt all those different ornaments and make some new ornament, the previous ornaments have ceased to exist, so they're unreal. But the gold is still there. So this is an analogy. So the underlying substance of ego, the reality of ego, is only pure awareness. But because the nature of ego is to know things other than itself, that is ignorance. So how is this relevant to this, this question? Pure awareness never becomes aware of anything. Pure awareness is pure being. It always remains as it is. What knows the semi-existence of other things is only ego. And this ego, if we investigate this ego, we will find it doesn't exist. So we shouldn't think that because we've risen as ego, so pure awareness has now become aware of all of this. No. Though ego is nothing other than pure awareness, it is only as ego that we know other things. As pure awareness, we never know anything other than ourselves, because pure awareness is immutable. It never undergoes any change. Sorry, that was a slightly longer answer for that question, but it's very important to understand it's not a question of pure awareness becoming aware of something. What is aware of anything other than itself is only ego. Pure awareness is ever untouched by that. The next two questions were asked in two different comments, but I will answer them together. The first one is, if consciousness is fundamental, where does it go under the influence of anesthetic? And the other one is there consciousness in anesthesia? I'll deal with the second one first. Is there consciousness in anesthesia? We talk about, let's ask a counter question. Is there consciousness in the waking state? Generally, we would say yes. Obviously, there is consciousness in the waking state. But that's a rather imperfect way of viewing it. The truth is, not that consciousness exists in the waking state, but the waking state exists in consciousness. And the consciousness in which waking state exists is not the pure consciousness, the pure awareness. It is only the consciousness or awareness that is called ego. So is there ego in waking and dream? In a sense, yes, but it's more correct to say waking and dream both occur within ego. Waking and dream exist only in the view of ego. Even the third state, sleep, exists only in the view of ego. That is, we call that third state in which nothing exists, not even ego, we call it sleep only from the perspective of ego in waking and dream. So what sleep actually is a state of pure awareness. Because pure awareness is eternal, sleep is eternal. But from the perspective of ego in waking and dream, sleep seems to be a temporary state. Why does it seem to be a temporary state? Because we've come out of it. And later on tonight, we're going to go back into it. So any state that we go into and come out of is a temporary state. But actually, all these states, waking, dream, and sleep, they appear only in the view of ego. So they exist only in the awareness that is called ego. It's not that awareness exists in these states, but that these states exist in awareness. The awareness in which these three states exist is the awareness called ego. But even that is not the real awareness. The underlying awareness is the pure awareness that we actually are. That is the real awareness. So coming back to this question, is there consciousness in anesthesia? Well, obviously, anesthesia is a state like sleep. It's a state of manolaya. So there's no ego in sleep. So, no ego in sleep and no ego in anesthesia. So in that sense, the awareness that knows other things is absent there. Not only is that awareness absent, all the other things that it knows in waking and dream are also absent there. So what remains, what the underlying reality is the pure awareness. So pure awareness is there eternally. It never goes anywhere. So the question, if consciousness is fundamental, where does it go under the influence of anesthesia? It doesn't go anywhere. That is, the consciousness that is fundamental is pure consciousness. That has no coming and going. It always is as it is. It's beyond time, beyond space. The consciousness that seems to come and go, that appears in waking and dream and disappears in sleep or in anesthesia or in coma or in Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that ego, that consciousness is only ego. So the truth is, all these different states appear, these alternating states of waking, dream, sleep, and like sleep, anesthesia, coma, Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, all these are called manolaya, that is their temporary dissolution of mind. But even these states of temporary dissolution of mind exist only in the view of the mind. That is, the mind doesn't exist in both states, but it's only the mind in waking and dream that says, I was asleep, I was under anesthesia, so I didn't know anything. But though we didn't know anything else in both states, we are always aware I am. But that which is aware I am in the absence of ego, that is the pure awareness. That is the underlying awareness. So I hope that answers all those questions adequately.